Recording in progress.
So, welcome everyone again to our weekly call. Hope you all had a fantastic weekend. In terms of what we're going to cover off today, I thought, given we're not that far away from the next ITF meeting, I thought we'd kick off by talking a little bit about encrypted client Hello. And sort of where some of us are at with some work on deployment considerations as they relate to ECH. Then, as always, we talk about some recent developments, forthcoming events, future core topics, of which we have many, and hopefully we'll have time for any other business at the end. So if you've got stuff that you want to mention that will be of interest to others, please be prepared to talk about that as well. What I thought I'd do in terms of ECH, just give you a quick recap because I'm conscious that not everyone is perhaps as au fait about this particular topic. Oh, it says the camera's playing up. Is the screen sharing working at the moment?
No, no, it's fine. Sorry, I said that earlier because I didn't say hi when everybody was talking. I was trying to get my camera working. That was from before. Thanks. Sorry.
Right. Sorry, that message just caught my eye. And indeed, Ralph, whatever that says as well. No translate function, I don't think, on Google on Zoom, which is a pity. Right, okay, so I just give a little bit of context with regards to ECH, just recap some things which we touched on at the last ITF meeting, and let you know where we're at in terms of moving forward, which I'll do over the next few minutes. But first things first, as a reminder, ECH is a mechanism within TLS for encrypting a client hello message under a server public key. That's what it says in the current internet draft for ECH, by way of a description of it. In essence, it builds on work that was previously called encrypted server name indication, ESNI, to encrypt the SNI data and other things now that it encompasses the whole client hello, not just SNI. It's being worked on within the ITS TLS working group, and there's been a fair amount of interop sort of testing over the last several months now. The internet draft is currently on version 15, which was published, I think, a few weeks before the London meeting, ITF 115. Available at that link. I'll share the links as always afterwards. So if anyone's not completely up to date with it, and the work that we've been doing looking at deployment considerations was largely to just consider when ECH is deployed. Well, what are the operational sort of considerations that CISOs and others may wish to take into account? Because inevitably, in sort of changing or amending a protocol, there are likely to be impacts on things that people currently do. I won't read through all of these words, just to highlight that there are various documents within the IETFs, so RFCs, that highlight, for example, that although privacy is important, you need to make sure that networks aren't made ungovernable when sort of making things or when enhancing privacy, and sort of need to take into account sort of current security and network operations practices, as covered in RFCs 7258 and 8404. And I guess one of the things which we wanted to highlight, that certainly from the perspective of security actors, the SNI data in particular is of legitimate interest to many of the security vendors, certainly in the enterprise and also to an extent in the sort of consumer security arenas, for things like content filtering, antivirus software of various types, etc. Certainly it's used in enterprise firewalls, for example. ECH itself is sort of covered by RFC 8744, which looks at how the SNI data is currently used, and it does touch on it sort of very briefly. It talks about what it characterizes as unanticipated uses of the SNI data, and it asserts, in my view, without a great deal of evidence, that where SNI data is used, that there are perfectly sort of acceptable alternatives that could be used in its stead. Although it doesn't quantify what those things are, nor indeed how complex they may be to deploy, and which is essentially what we're trying to do with the work that we're currently undertaking. Which brings me sort of neatly on to the draft that a number of us have been working on over the last sort of actually almost exactly 12 months now. We presented it in Vienna way back last April, IETF 113, last March actually, sorry, not April. And as some of you will be aware, we then had a side meeting in London in November during IETF 115, and subject to a suitable sort of time and venue being available, we propose to do the same again in IETF 116 in Yokohama next month. The existing document that we've been working on is currently at version 03, and we expect by Yokohama it will probably be at version 05. And the other thing, sorry, which I forgot to mention earlier, but helpfully as a reminder, is in the text in red on this chart, because this is a point that's come up a number of times. The work we're doing isn't about saying you shouldn't deploy ECH. It is about documenting the impact of its deployment. So it's definitely not about stopping the development or deployment of ECH, because I know that was a concern from some within the TLS working group and wider IETF community. In terms of where we're up to, just to bring us up to date, and then I'll sort of stop and see if there are any sort of questions or other points people want to add, is there's an ad hoc group who've been working on the document and will continue to do so with probably weekly meetings through till IETF 116. One of the things that we committed to do during the side meeting in London, which we haven't done yet, but we'll do over the next couple of weeks, is to provide some input on technical issues to the ECH GitHub, which is hosted by the TLS working group. And also we'll expand the current draft to include at least some sort of summary information on what appropriate uses of ECH might be, because there were a view expressed by some that the document was potentially came across as a bit negative. So to record some positive uses of ECH, as well as capturing what some of the deployment issues are, And there's a few other points that were raised during the side meeting in London, which we also just need to update the text to encompass as well. And that should bring us pretty much up to date by the time we get to Yokohama for a further discussion. So that's really just in summary, because I don't want to get too much down into the detail where we are currently. As I say, the plan is subject to availability. We intend to host a further side meeting for those people that are interested during ITF 116, which I think because of the time zone, it will be, if we can, we'll do it in the evening in Yokohama, which potentially will coincide with a sort of a call not too early in the morning for people in Europe. Should you be interested in joining that, but you're not attending in person. So that's something you might want to look out for, and I'll share the details as soon as we have a sort of confirmed time. Remote access will be available for that. At least that's the plan. Now, in London, it was down to the organisers to set up their own remote access. If we do that, it will probably be using Zoom. Unless the Secretariat have made alternate arrangements for Yokohama. So, as I say, that pretty much brings us up to date. So I'll stop talking there, and so basically, if anyone's interested in becoming involved in that activity, please shout, let me know, and I'll make sure you get invited to the calls. But other than that, any other comments or questions? And Ralph may well have put a comment or question in the chat, but as it's in German, I've no idea what it says. It's possibly not intended for this. So, Peter.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, sorry about my camera. It's playing up today. Did you want this to be a discussion of ECH itself, or just for about the upcoming discussions?
Well, by all means, I particularly wanted just to give people an update on what we were doing about the deployment considerations, but I'm perfectly happy to broaden the discussion as anyone sees fit. So by all means, just go for it if that's useful.
Well, the major criticism I've seen of ECH deployment so far is that it prevents domain fronting, which is a kind of if anyone is not familiar, it's a way of, it's a censorship evasion technique where you connect to a particular host and then you give a different host header when you actually, so you request a different host than when it looks like you're accessing. And ECH kind of stops that being possible. So it seems to conflict, well, it's the privacy versus censorship thing. Is that addressed in the RFC?
I don't recall that being addressed in the RFC as it applies to ECH. It's certainly not currently addressed in the internet draft that we're working on. But as Chris has got his hand up and he's directly involved with this, Chris, you're probably far better placed than I to comment on that, if that's useful.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say that it doesn't prohibit domain fronting in any particular way. The two are sort of orthogonal. Actual deployments of ECH are not designed to intend to allow domain fronting. We wrote a blog post about this a while back to sort of describe the nuanced difference between domain fronting and ECH. At the end of the day, if you're using ECH to connect to a particular origin, while it is true that the name that appears on the wire is different from the name that you're actually connecting to, the name that you're actually connecting to at the TLS layer is the same as that which you intend to like interact with at the HTTP layer, which is sort of the definition of domain fronting. I'm
not like intimately familiar with the details myself, so I don't think I'm really qualified to comment. It's just something that I had seen raised as a criticism, and I was curious if it had been discussed. But if you could paste a link to the blog post, that'd be great. Thanks.
Let me pull that up.
Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Thanks. Good question, and thanks, Chris, for giving a very direct answer. That's really helpful. That was covered recently.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. Marwan, I think you're raising your hand.
Yeah, Andrew, I saw Chris's hand. I'm like, how do people raise their hands? I don't see so I'm very impressed that Chris managed to raise his hand. But
under reactions, there's a little reactions icon. If you
reactions,
drop down under that. Anyway, you've raised your hand the other way, which is just by gesturing at the screen, which is all equally fine.
So look, I know I don't pop in often enough, and I'm really sorry for that. But I was just looking at the list of the technical stuff. So let me ask you, and this is knowing, like, I am openly critical of ECH. I believe there are ways forward, deployments, and all of the rest, but I think I've started to express publicly the concerns I have. Chris and I have been working on how to at least address some of them. When I hear the classic arguments of there's a box or some security feature on path that is somehow disabled or handicapped by ECH, there's one fundamental question that I think either doesn't get asked or never gets answered, and I think it matters here, which is there any of those challenges that can't be resolved by DNS? If the SNI is so important, if the name is so important, then isn't it better to trap it or to do something about it at the resolver, for which, 2 years ago now, there was an updated RFC that added a whole bunch of new codes to return to the client that gives some indication of exactly why an IP address or some other record is not being returned. And I think honestly, for all that there will be, I'm sure, deployment challenges related to ECH, the classic and the obvious ones about protecting the school or the campus or the security box or whatever it is, to me, it seems like DNS is an obvious way to go forward and a better one because it's much more transparent.
Well, I know that some of the content filtering software for schools, for example, uses SNI rather than DNS. I'm just looking at the list of attendees to see if, I'm not sure that anyone on the call at the moment is personally involved in the production of content filtering software.
To be clear, to reduce it to simplest terms, my claim here is, and I think it's important to address in any documents that go in front of the IETF, my claim here is anything that currently relies on the SNI that might be, broken or disabled or have limited visibility all of those features can be restored via DNS. Yeah. And in a more responsible manner is what I claim.
Well, let me pose a question, because I know there's some people on here from a number of ISPs, for example, who do use things like use SNI for things like zero rating of content. So anyone involved in that sufficiently knowledgeable to say why SNI is usable and DNS isn't in that, for that particular application, for example?
That's a good one, by the way, Andrew.
Pick that because I know there are a number of people from ISPs here that might be in a position to answer that, whereas I don't think there are for things like content filtering. So anyone feeling brave?
Yeah, here's Nick. I mean, we used both, but I mean, our challenge is that we have to stop the zero rating service by end of this quarter. So we are not deploying it anymore.
So you're not doing zero rating anyway? Was that
no? We used to do it, but I think there was a decision by a European community that we are not allowed to offer that kind of service anymore. And we had a period where we have a kind of transition period until we stop it, and we have to stop it by, or we are stopping it by first quarter this year.
Okay,
that means that this kind of use case is not relevant for us anymore, at least for the zero rating.
Fine. Okay.
And honestly, Europe is one place in the world. I can imagine zero rating might be important elsewhere. But to that, I would also say when there's a zero rating, there's typically an agreement between the ISP and the zero rated service, in which case they could probably orchestrate between them to exchange some kind of information that's going to ensure that zero rating is always possible.
Correct. Yeah.
Anyone else from any other ISP, perhaps not within the EU, that could offer?
So, Andrew, this is Henny Fahmy with AT&T.
Hi, Henny.
So I just want and this is not AT&T specific. So I'm going to answer this question from a technology perspective. Most mobile core providers provide information to mobile core ISPs about how to detect signatures of video traffic. And the SNI field is significantly used for this signature. I just want to tell you, encrypting this particular field is going to pretty much blind the ISPs of detecting video streaming and using this to limit video resolution on small screens to standard definition. This has very substantial impact on us as mobile providers in terms of mobile core capacity. And there is no significant difference when you're looking at your small screen. There is no significant difference between HD and SD and 4K. Some people would detect the difference, but there isn't substantial difference. But it has very substantial different impact on our core capacity and RAM capacity. So
Henny, that's a great one. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just going to add from the perspective of the network that I'm involved in, which is EE, we don't do anything like that. So we don't apply any limits to video resolution. So obviously networks vary.
So Henny, great name, by the way. I think there, and I'm a network person through and through. I am not the applied cryptographer, but there I would say, again, via DNS, there's an easy solution, which is, when the client requests a name, right? And in effect, like it's even a better blanket solution in a sense, because now you can communicate with the network what the IP addresses are that are being returned to clients and which clients requested them.
So the SNI is not the only signature. And again, this is not AT&T specific, okay? The the core vendors provide lots of information, IP addresses, SNI, all kind of information of how to detect this video traffic. And here in the US, this is a common practice. I don't know about Europe, but this is a common practice here in the US. And as long as it's disclosed, of course. So I just want to tell you, if these fields are encrypted, it's going to have substantial impact on this area. So just keep this in mind.
Can we agree that it's solvable?
It is solvable. To what extent, I'm not sure. Just I want to tell you, this is a moving target. This has always been a moving target, and you tune this capability on a certain fashion. And I want to tell you, we try to work very closely with content providers, the whole industry trying to work closely with content providers such that we do not impact their user experience. So it's a moving target. They are always changing these signatures, and it is solvable. How long it's going to be solved and what's the impact of the SNI field, that's a study that needs to be done. I cannot form a clear judgment on this, and I'm not even this me to answer this question.
Yeah. I think I'm raising it just so that when Andrew does this side meeting, right, I think this is fundamentally, this has to be it, right? Is there anything that cannot be solved via DNS or isn't already solved by, direct orchestration with the content providers like zero rating? And I can't find any example of that. And maybe that's the way the deployment challenges should go, is to figure out if ECH were to go out the door,
correct,
then what's the right way to use DNS and other systems to compensate?
So when this was proposed, we always said the industry needs to develop a very good understanding of best practices of how to deal with this issue rather than rushing into it. And that's we need to be very careful. It's used on the enterprise field as well, as we heard over and over here on this call. ISPs use it on a varying degrees. So before we rush into solutions, before we rush into making this a default, the impact needs to be very well understood, and as well, clear signal needs to be given to the industry that we are moving in this direction such that we can find alternatives. And I'm not saying there isn't alternatives. So there are alternatives, and we need to develop a good understanding where we're heading with this.
And I suppose it's the other thing, just to reflect on the call that we had a couple of weeks back with the indicators of compromise. Well, currently internet draft, soon to be RFC. It's cleared the ISG. Again, that called out, I think, to be fair, both DNS and SNI as key indicators of compromise from a security perspective. So I guess that fits more in the OPSEC area, but I don't think any of the authors are on the call this week. Otherwise, they could comment on that. Chris, you've got your hand raised. Is that a legacy hand or is that a new hand?
It's a new hand.
Sure.
That's okay.
Jump in then.
I wanted to quickly ask Amy. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Just to perhaps sharpen his comment that we need sort of a signal to the industry saying that this is where we're going. I'm wondering if you could perhaps describe what that signal would look like ideally in your mind. Is it like insufficient to see, for example, the browsers like deploying this sort of thing, or do you need like what would be a suitable signal?
So the signal is, I mean, we were. I'm sorry, I could have. I'm not sure that my information is updated on this front, but a while ago, this was a very hot topic of debate and driven mainly by Google and saying that we have this capability about to be turned on by default in our browser and our servers. And this puts everybody in a scramble mode. So I think we have to have a roadmap saying that, okay, this is what we're going to do by such a milestones. This is what we're going to do by such date or such period of time. And we understand the security implications. As a matter of fact, our CSO folks, for example, love the encryption of this field. Now, how it's going to impact other areas, that's the problem. So some sort of a milestone saying by such a date or such a year or such a time frame, we're going to move in this direction and have some sort of an industry momentum where everybody on the same page, rather than Google saying, oh, we are doing this, starting this release of Chrome, and no return back. So it's some sort of industry consensus on milestones and timeframes on when things can be done. That's my view of the signal. And at the same time, mobile core providers, whoever is using this, be prepared and try to find alternatives. There is another big area, which is the cybersecurity area for ISPs and how they are using this information as well for cybersecurity defense mechanisms. Mm-hmm. So they need to be prepared as well. So this is some sort of a milestone to the industry, clear signal, all the browser vendors, all the content providers moving to this model by such time frame, such that we are all prepared and all singing off the same sheet of music here.
Okay, and then I want to follow up on something that Marwan was digging at a little bit earlier. He was saying that he was asking whether or not it was possible to provide sort of the same functionality that you get based on looking at the SNI using the DNS. And I don't know, Marwan, if you saw, there's a thread in the chat now. There's a couple of threads sort of digging into that a bit. And what seems to be emerging is that there's often difficulties in actually going down the DNS route from a cost perspective or from a logistics perspective or whatever. Like, I don't know, there's probably legitimate reasons as to why, doing it via DNS is harder than sticking with what they currently have, which is like looking at the TLS SNI. So to me, the challenge seems to be, how do we encourage and evangelize use of the DNS to solve these particular things rather than look at the SNI, taking into consideration the real world costs that come with that. Because it's with anything that's in true software, if you're going to make a change, it's going to cost something. So I'm wondering if folks have ideas about how to perhaps go down that route under the constraints that are very real and do exist.
Certainly, if it's useful, just while people are thinking on that, I know some of the companies that specialize, for example, in content filtering software for schools that use SNI. I can easily reach out to them and ask them directly, is there a specific reason why they use SNI, not DNS or some other indicator? There may be a technical reason.
Andrew, I think I'm comfortable predicting what those kinds of answers would be. And it's very simply that SNI is on path and available. You only have to implement, if you want to do any of this sort, you only implement it in one place, and it's already part of the routing software and so on. And it's not hard to do. DNS historically is easy to set up, difficult to configure, I guess, from some perspective. And do this at DNS means one is you have to orchestrate DNS to do this. If you're going to ban certain domains outright, the flip side is if you think about this for other applications like rate limiting or something, then there needs to be some communication between the DNS solver and the rest of the network. And so I don't deny that there would be some novel, I think, opportunities more than challenges. My only claim is, I think, in order for these concerns to be credible, we have to show that there is no other alternative. And I believe that actually DNS in the long run is better, cheaper, and more scalable. Sorry.
I would agree with you on that. I think that's, like you said, there's a piece to integrating it into the network gear. But I think once that path is open and people start doing that, I think it provides a lot of novel control capabilities that you just can't get easily any other way.
Yeah. And we can also ask some of the security companies as well, who again, if there are any specific reasons other than the ones that we've covered. Kathleen, rather. I can see you've got your hand raised. Really confused Kathleen and Marwan before. That's probably my eyes looked in one direction, my head in another. Anyway, Kathleen, sorry, do you want to come in?
Sure, yes. So as you know, Center for Internet Security does run a service through a large vendor to provide DNS screening for all of the U.S. local, state, local, tribal, and territorial organizations that sign up. We have about 15,000 members, and some large number of that does use the service. And so we are able to offer a basic service that just uses DNS. And our team did explore a higher fidelity solution. Now, I'd have to confirm if that used SNI, but my assumption would be that, digging deeper into the URL is really what that differentiator was, right? So an organization might be okay with going to a domain or an IP address, but only certain sections of that based on the fuller URL. And so that might be the reason. For cost reasons, we offer ours for free. So all of these members can sign up for free, which is why we have a really large subscription base. And that's why we use just DNS.
Marwan, can I quickly interject?
Yeah, go ahead, you do it.
To Kathleen, for the URL case, how do you actually get access to the URLs in the presence of HTTPS? Do you install custom routes on clients? Are these clients managed? What is the solution there?
I am not positive. So it's run through a vendor, and I did not run the evaluation with the organization. So I will see part of the tricky part is I may have to go back to the large vendor. Our team may or may not know the technical details in depth. So I'll do that to see what was being used for the paid for solution. And I suspect it might be SNI.
My point though is like if the client is like doing HTTPS to a particular server and you want to look at the URL, you can't just like look at the SNI. You have to terminate TLS, decrypt that traffic, and then look at the URL, which implies to me that there's like some sort of client-side modification going on. And if you're in a position where you have that capability, you can do a whole lot more. Like you can configure the DNS resolvers, you can do all sorts of things that don't require like security policies to be enforced in the network, that can be enforced perhaps on the client side. So I'm curious, like,
I'm going to have to check because it's not our endpoint solution that this was being done with. It was a cloud-based solution.
Got it.
So that's why I suspect that it's not done at the endpoint. It's done in the cloud using some other, but we did not get great feedback on that above the DNS-based solution.
Great.
I'm sorry, Marwan, go ahead.
No, I think the easier path here is I would wager, Kathleen, if you need help in deciphering whatever the vendor gives you, I mean, either Chris or I'm sure.
I was a security area director in the IETF. I am technical enough. I was not involved in the service.
And is it? Do we know? Is it a DNS
testing.
only vendor, or is it something else, or do we know?
I mean, the vendor has lots of. I mean, some of us know the people working there. They're very smart. I'm not sure what they were doing exactly. So I will go and find out, but I will reach out to somebody very technical there so I get the full answer. What I was saying was if I reached out to our team that did the testing of this alternate service, they may not have dug in the way that I would dig in.
Thanks for the clarification.
Thanks. That'd be really helpful, Kathleen. And I see Glenn had commented in the chat just one thing which caught my eye, which is of course to use DNS instead, you would need to use a particular resolver.
On that, so let's be open for I am highly critical of ECH the way it currently stands. Okay, but I want to be honest about ECH as well. I think that argument only stands if we assume that the only places to do DOH and DOT are the large public resolvers. But there is no reason that tomorrow every public resolver on the planet couldn't be DOH enabled. I mean, how you discover it, sure, it doesn't come through DHCP and so on. But again, these are easy changes. I don't want to say easy. These are changes that are within the realm of possibility and probably should be pursued, because it would be better if everybody's DNS queries on the planet were safeguarded, even if those queries were going to the local ISP resolver.
Yeah, and to be fair, Glenn will elaborate on this possibly. This discovery for encrypted resolvers is in hand, albeit ironically it's currently paused going through the standard process because of ECH, ironically.
Yeah, if I could jump in. Hi, Marwan. So yeah, by the way, I'm one of the co-chairs for the Encrypted Client Discovery Working Group, so know a little bit about the topic. And so one of the challenges I would have under this model, would you envision that in places that were concerned of forcing these routes through particular resolvers, where we now have the situation where applications are making the decision on which resolver to choose, whether it's your browser application or some other application, doesn't have to be your browser, could be operating system. Anyhow, would you envision that networks would start blocking DNS access to public resolvers like Quad 1 and Quad 8 as a way to sort of force? I mean, like, I'm not trying to be difficult here. Just it seems like if we go with the DNS, it pushes us in one direction, which we've sort of been moving away from, which is, the model of let anybody use any resolver they want, as long as they, do it reasonably and have a good discovery mechanism. But if we now want to use DNS for these other controls, then we start having to force people through particular resolvers. So it's a real change.
I'll say you're not wrong. Maybe no comment at this stage. It's something that has crossed my mind, and I'm sure the minds of many. I think that is a reasonably valid concern, which is how do you get people to use, short of some discovery method or the application sort of forcing it? What's the alternative? Do you block the 1.1s and the quad 9s and the quad 8s of the world? Okay. But then you can even imagine there's a world past that where there's some provider that emerges that says, I'm putting my DNS service on the same IP addresses as the content service, because IP addresses don't really have a meaning at all, and there's no reason you couldn't do that. So it's a reasonable concern.
I mean, we went through a lot of this about 2 years ago, or even maybe a little farther back, where we bantered around the idea of like, well, do we have a per client policy of what DNS resolvers you can use? And while there are, mobile device managers and enterprise device managers, which will do those kind of things, they're not pervasive on kids' phones or Chromebooks or anything like that. And we went around and around as a community and talked at length about that, and that sort of failed. And then we talked about networks publishing policy, and that sort of failed. And where we ended up with was the mechanisms that are defined in ADD, these days being DNR and DDR, for resolvers themselves through the DNS to publish, hey, I'm here, come talk to me, here's how you do that if you want. And then defer to the client and the client software and the client apps to decide how they want to navigate that pathway, if you will. So it would be a real significant change in architectural approach to the network, I think, in DNS to do some of this stuff.
Yeah, no. I think it depends on the context you're talking about, though, because that's not what I was saying in the chat. Was it's not at all unusual for people to be blocking quad 9, quad 8, quad 1 these days in controlled networks, right? That would be unusual in the ISP space, but in the enterprise space and even in the education space, that's done all over the place now. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of work that's done on limiting access to encrypted resolvers in order to enforce policy, right? Because a lot of people have come around to using DNS as their enforcement mechanism or a part of their enforcement mechanism. And people can easily sidestep that by, turning on dot or do. And so now they're going back and working against that. So it's a consistent battle.
I'm going to reinforce that sort of orthogonal, but so Glenn, it's also, it's too bad, if we grab Jeff Houston and put him in the room, if I recall last figure, he would tell you something like 60 to 70% of all queries that hit the large public resolvers are actually ISP resolvers.
Sure, but we all know that there's proposals like ODNS out there, and as got mentioned, to turn any site that's on the network into a DNS resolver, so that you're not it's not just one resolver, one set of resolvers. It's sort of a really open field. Talk to whoever you want; they'll give you the answer.
But wait, hold on. I think we have to separate here. Like, we can always throw out the what about Tor case, and when we talk about things like the somebody setting up an oblivious proxy and they're there's no way out of that. I think we have to talk about the normal case, not what an individual decides to do. So you've got the enterprise and the organizations, just like Ross talked about. If you have large oblivious proxy type services, Apple Private Relay is one of them. In fact, Apple Private Relay's instruction publicly on their webpage relates to DNS if you want to control what Private Relay does. So I think what you're expressing is reasonable and it's correct, but I don't think that is necessarily a problem.
Remember, with having looked, coincidentally seen a cut down version of Jeff's presentation as recently as a week or so ago. You're not wrong, Marwin, that the stats are that, I can't remember the exact number, but let's say it was 70%, 75% of traffic goes to in-country resolvers, which I think Jeff surmised were probably ISP-based resolvers, although, to be fair, he didn't drill down into more detail to confirm that. But that still means that I think 15 to 20% of the traffic was going to Google, for example. And of course, the Google traffic was global, 15% to 20% of global traffic, whereas that DNS traffic for the ISPs, that was split between maybe, depending on the country, could be 8 to 10 ISPs in one country, multiplied by 170, 180 countries. So yeah, it's a tiny fraction per ISP of the total traffic that would be routed to, for example, Google. I think Google was by far away the biggest. I think the next biggest was Cloudflare, but yeah, order of magnitude difference on that. And of course, you've got the difference between the default traffic versus the traffic that people are actively determining where they want it to go. Which is because I think a lot of that ISP traffic would be the people that never heard of DNS, let alone are in a position to configure how to choose one. Anyway, we digress a little, or I do, so apologies for that. Anyone else have any questions or observations? And this is all helpful, by the way. I will go back through this to make sure that we pick up the relevant points in the deployment considerations document to address. So this is all very useful. Dan, did you want to come in?
No, I'm sorry. I have comments to make, but no time to make them. I'm good.
By all means, use email if that's easier afterwards, Dan.
I may do that. Thanks.
Chris, did you want to come back in?
Yeah. What's the best way to engage on the ECH considerations document? Is there like a mailing list for it? By GitHub issues or?
Yes, former and to the letter, there will be a GitHub imminently. So I'll take an action. I'll share the details, certainly the GitHub, as soon as I'm sort of given that. Arno, one of the co-authors at Broadcom, is setting that up. He was setting it up last week, so it probably is done, but he hasn't shared it with me yet.
Got it. Happy to help from the ECH side.
Perfect. And likewise, as you would have maybe picked up from my quick run through, we will be sort of channeling some relevant things into the ECH GitHub where appropriate. So it won't be all of it, because that'd be a complete waste of people's time.
Sounds great. Look forward to it.
Okay, I'll just see if anyone's got any other comments before we move on. I'm guessing not. I'm not seeing anyone gesturing at me, and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So, and I'm conscious there's a lot of stuff in the chat which I wasn't able to pick up as it was going through, because it was going through too quickly. But again, I'll go back through that afterwards, so things aren't lost. So thank you for all of your contributions. That's much appreciated. Right, let me just go back and share my screen again, and we'll change topics. Onto other things just briefly. That didn't work for some reason. I can see things, but it's not shared my screen, I don't think. Okay, that's better. Okay, right. So just briefly, and I'm not going to go through these in details. We've got 5 minutes till we time out. So things from the weekly headlines from this week, you'll see on the screen. I'm not going to go through them all, but as Peter's on the call, Peter penned an article in the last few days on the impact of quantum computing on DNS. So I won't attempt to précis that. Worth a read. Have a look. Equally, Jeff Houston, sorry, from AP Nick, put his thoughts on the recent OARC event. I know we covered that on this call last week in terms of the event, but by all means, have a look. Get Jeff's take on summarise some of the presentations. Also, Echo put out a report well, they just published a report. They held a workshop back end of last calendar year, and they've just published a report on it, which was just looking at the state of DNS in outline. So just some of their thoughts on that, and then final one I'll mention from this screen. As Emily's on the call, DNS Research Federation captured some very interesting thoughts on blockchain domain data, which they were sort of using from the DAP Live system. Now, Emily and colleagues will be on this call. Is it next week? Next week or the week after? Imminently. Anyway, I think it's next week. Yeah. Now, having recovered from coming back from San Francisco to demo that system sort of more generally. So if that's of interest, you can sort of see the DAP Live system in action same time next week. And then again, time won't permit me to go through these, but I pulled out a number of other not directly DNS related news items that caught my eye over the last week. So have a look at those as you see fit. Probably the most important one, top of that other items of interest list, the draft agenda for ITF 116 was published on Friday. Emphasis on draft. I think it's finalized this Friday, but it will at least give you a sense of what's likely to be on the agenda in outline in Yokohama in a few weeks' time. And then last thing from me, sorry, last two things from me. One is from the various events and so on. RIPE 86 has just put out a call for presentations, deadline 12th March. You'll see that towards the bottom of the screen. So if you're interested in presenting either online or in person in Rotterdam, RIPE 86 is coming up relatively soon now, amongst other things. I've yet to see, by the way, the thing in bold in terms of events. The ICANN DNS Symposium I mentioned on the call last week looks like it's going to be in Vietnam in September. I haven't got any more details yet, but as they're confirmed, I'll just mention those because I know that will be of interest to a number of people on this call. And then we got sort of quite a few topics planned for the next few weeks. I just drew your attention to the one on 10th of April, as that's new on the list, which is again, we discussed this on the call a few weeks back. There was interest in New Star's protective DNS service. So one of the New Star team is going to come on the call on the 10th of April to talk about that and hopefully take questions. Also, hope to have firmed up soon a presentation on early experiences with DNR, but that's coming in due course. As soon as it's sort of firmed up, I'll let you know. Okay, that's it from me. We've got 2 minutes left. Anyone got anything else that you would like to share? So we're very much in any other business. And if you do, either raise your hands or drop something in the chat, as Vicky has just done, to just highlight that associated to the RIPE meeting in Rotterdam, there will be a DNS-focused hackathon as well. So thank you for mentioning that, Vicky. So that would definitely be of interest, I think, to some people on the call. Anything else that anyone wants to mention, either in the chat or just unmute and say so? Give you a chance to do that if you wish. Not looking. It doesn't look like anyone's frantic to unmute. I'm not seeing anything in the chat currently. All right. Well, look. I think we had a sort of that was a useful discussion. So thank you everyone for your comments on ECH. As I said, I'll go through those, make sure we don't miss stuff from the chat as well, and I'll make sure that's all shared so you'll have an opportunity to read through at your leisure as well as I. So along with the recording, so if you just click through, you'll see all the a lightly edited version of the chat as well, just to catch up. But in the meantime, have a fantastic week as always. And as we just mentioned, this time next week, the DNS Research Federation team will be here in force to demonstrate the DAP Live system, which I'm really looking forward to, because it sounds like it's a really interesting development. So look forward to catching you all then, but have a great week in the meantime. Thanks everyone for joining.